elevating that experience and differentiating what you do and adding an emotional component, that's never going to go out of style for a brewery, for a restaurant that offers a lot of beers. It just never is. So I think in this environment, the more you can do that, I think now more than ever, it's more relevant.
You are listening to the Capital Craft Podcast, brought to you by the San Diego Brewers Guild. I'm your host, Eric Fowler.
And I'm Jeff Fox with Beer Media Co.
And I'm Dan Imdieke, president and co-owner of the Cicerone Certification Program.
We are going to get so geeky on beer today, right?
I'm here for it.
Yeah, so thank you for sitting down with us today, and it's really cool. You are a San Diego local.
Yeah. I mean, and excited to kind of get more ingrained into the local community as we get going here.
I bet a lot of local industry members probably don't realize that you're here, and that was a recent acquisition of the Cicerone Certification Program. So could you give our listeners a little history of yourself and how you came into where you're currently at?
Yeah, I mean, so been in the beer industry over 20 years. Started in the on-premise in restaurants. So was with the Yard House concept in the early life of that company. Started as a bartender. By the end of it, was kind of the director of bar operations for the concept. Opened 20 of their first 25 restaurants, which is kind of why I look like this. It's a great place to get to know beer across the country. That's where the passion really started. And there's still a great Cicerone supporter and customer today.
So you were all for the 150-foot long draw systems in there?
There were some challenges with that, and I knew a fraction then what I know now about how challenging that is, let alone selling that many beers on tap. But so that's where it started. Worked with Old Chicago as a beer buyer, Molson Coors after that on the education team, and that's where I kind of led me to the Master Cicerone journey, getting involved with that team there, and then right into. Was at a bit of a crossroads. My business partner now and I, Jason Pratt, worked at Molson Coors together. We worked at a beer app startup company that never launched, ran out of money. And we're at a crossroads, and we had always joked over the years, because we've been passionate about beer education. I wonder if Ray, I think he's ready to maybe retire. Do you think he'd want to sell that? And one day he called me and said, how serious are you about that? Because we got time right now. I said, let's do it. And one thing led to another, and it's a bit surreal, but here we are. Yeah. Yeah.
So for those that are listening that don't know, what is the Cicerone Certification Program?
Certification Program.
Who's it for? And where does it currently stand as an industry standard?
Yeah, I mean, so it's been around 15 years. It is, pretty much the gold standard of beer certifications, which is one of the reasons we wanted to be involved in it and eventually acquire it. And so it seeks to essentially elevate the experience of beer across the spectrum, more specifically for beer professionals, for consumers too. And we have people across all three tiers in a variety of roles that have some level of certification. We have 160,000 certified beer server level ones, almost 5,000 certified Cicerones, and then the top two levels, a little shorter list, 190 and about 28, but in 90 countries. So it's meant to give a well-rounded perspective on how to show beer in its best light and kind of curate it to its maximum potential.
Yeah, I remember I took the certified beer server test online in like 2010, 2011, just when I was starting to homebrew, or I was already homebrewing, but thinking, is this something I want to do? And I remember pulling my parents aside, being like, I was working at a dry cleaner and playing music most of the time. And I said, I think I want to work in beer. Like, what does that mean? And, fortunately, it took a long time. And they're like, okay, I get it now. I think it was my name in a newspaper or something.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, he is working in beer now. But I also remember in 2012, 2013, I took the exam in Washington, D.C. I was living out there. And when I moved home back to San Diego, I was submitting my resume, and people didn't know what it was. Breweries. It wasn't just like a bottle shop or a restaurant. Like, I was talking to breweries about jobs, and they didn't even know what it was. And it was cool to see that change over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think those early days, I think Ray and his team, just to establish the credibility of it, it had kind of this like unassailable kind of gatekeeper of valid beer knowledge, and saw it kind of shift to where it is kind of the industry standard in the beer industry. Most people know it, but I think our next kind of thing is to make it a household name. So where it's not you're not always having to compare it to the sommelier program.
Yeah.
It's like the sommelier program, but it's for beer. It's kind of, I'm with Cicerone, and this is standing kind of on its own merit. And I think there's a journey to go on to get to that, but that's kind of one of our North Stars as we've kind of taken.
That was definitely how it was explained to me. Is like when I was like, I asked, what it was, and they're like, yeah, it's basically a sommelier, but for beer, and,
right?
And that's, and sommelier is obviously like a worldwide major program that has been around. I don't know. It was probably started in France. I don't know, but
I think so.
It's just because the name, but
well, it's also a title that could be used outside of that program as well. So that's where it's a little confusing, right? Mm-hmm. You can go to a restaurant with a sommelier, but they might not be certified through the Master Court of Sommeliers.
Right.
Interesting. I'm learning so much.
So what need are these certifications filling within the beer industry from like an employer standpoint and a consumer standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that is the main thing when we took this over is, how does this apply, right? And I think that there's some folks who intuitively kind of understand how the certifications can be used to do different jobs better in the beer industry. But I think what we're trying to do is connect those dots a little more actively, that this information is practically applicable to a variety of roles. So I think we have people from everywhere from, the most obvious kind of transition is to taproom employees, beer service, on-premise, things like that. But we have folks in marketing, folks in wholesaler distributor roles that are managing a large portfolio of brands. So knowledge of beer styles is a huge thing, or being able to give an on-premise account draft quality advice. So I think it's a well-rounded piece of beer knowledge where you're dangerous enough to have a conversation around just about every topic in beer. And then how that comes to life is different based on what your role is. So I think currently employers that want to have a foundational kind of piece to get their people passionate about beer, because you can't be passionate about something you don't know a lot about. I think it's serving that need, especially if there's no kind of way for that to come to life internally. And then for employers, hopefully getting a more engaged staff, a better experience for their customers, retention increases, all those different things when people feel like they're passionate and a part of something.
Might even be something where increasing the average ticket size, if someone's able to offer good pairing advice or something like that, getting to make that where it's like, oh, now they're going to add a beer to it rather than maybe getting a water or a soda or something like that. So.
Right. And I think so some of the ROI on education is there's ways to measure it, but some of it is, it's an amalgamation of an overall experience, right? But to your point, one of the things that I've seen personally happen in large restaurant chains, up and coming smaller ones, if you can get that bartender or server to sell one more beer a shift, 2 more beers a shift, times number of people, times the day of the year, that's paying for itself, I think, a lot more than a lot of potential investments out there. And I think elevating that experience and differentiating what you do and adding an emotional component, that's never going to go out of style for a brewery, for a restaurant that offers a lot of beers. It just never is. So I think in this environment, the more you can do that, I think now more than ever, it's more relevant.
People are looking for an experience, right? When they go out. And so if it's, that can make or break where they come back an extra time, it's a repeat visitor. It's something like that because of their experience. So I definitely think I can see some value for sure as a consumer on the consumer side mostly, and a marketer. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. With that said, though, you're not teaching people how to sell beer, right? You're just arming them with the understanding, and then use a separate set of skills on top of that to be accurate in what you're selling.
Yeah, right. So it's definitely a foundational, here's different brewing traditions from all the different countries, parameters of beer styles, draft beer systems, beer and food pairing, brewing process and ingredients, so what levers and decisions brewers can pull to create different flavors. So it's meant to be a foundational piece that at each of the different levels can kind of then translate over into, well, how would I have this sales conversation? And I think we rolled out a module kind of in the middle of this acquisition called Selling with Cicerone, which was meant to be a companion to the Certified Beer Server that talks about how do I go in as a brewery or distributor sales rep and go, now I'm becoming a trusted advisor for an account where they're asking me about draft quality. I got an LTO with beer and food pairings coming up. I'm going to go to the person that knows the most about beer, and how that relationship can just grow organically from having a passionate, engaged person selling beer to them. And I think our job is to make that even more relevant and connect those dots more readily with some targeted classes, content, things like that, which are kind of in the pipeline. So,
I assuming for both of yourselves as well, but beer I enjoy because of the accessibility, right? The range of flavors, the unpretentiousness of it. How do you combat that while educating, but keeping things, listeners of this podcast and anybody that's heard me teach before will hear me say often my two favorite pairings are, I probably shouldn't say it on this podcast, but, Le Fin du Monde, Belgian Triple, and white wine, garlic reduction mussels at Blue Bohem in Kensington. It's so good. And a Tecate and carne asada taco, right? And I say it half tongue in cheek to disarm people.
Sure.
It's like, well, I'm gonna listen to this guy talk for 2 hours on beer. And it's like, well, I like that. I like Modelo and tacos. Now it opens them up to being a little more receptive to what I have to say.
Sure.
But how does the program kind of combat that when I've done some of the exams for the quartermaster sommeliers, and my approach is so different. I thought I was really going to struggle with it, and I did. And I'm like, I know wine. I sold wine for a couple of years, but it was difficult for me to switch into that brain of like really high end service. Like, how does the Cicerone program kind of combat that to keep it unpretentious?
Yeah, I mean, so that's been a bit of a goal, I think, since Ray launched it. It's different, right? So it's meant to show beer in its best light, but the way that happens is often a different conversation than you'd get for a wine pairing or something like that. So to me, it's know your audience, right? And having done education at Molson Coors and having to do pairings that are not unlike Tecate with tacos, it was like, let's talk about what the beer is doing, not what it's not doing. And there's still some valid things to talk about and get excited about potentially there. So I think it's know your audience and know what they want. And I think, Cicerone isn't meant to tell the complete story of the Trappist order and expect that that's what people are going to do at a bar. Like, there's maybe a small subset of the population, very small, that wants to hear that. But last time I checked, San Diego had a lot of IPAs available, just differentiating those and how different hops come to life, hop techniques to talk about. I think if you've got some of that well-rounded information, there's a way to have an accessible conversation about that and like what you need to know. And I think further you go into Cicerone and the more we can kind of build our credibility of the program, you have less of that kind of overcompensation, overcorrect of like, I'm going to wow you with my beer knowledge, and the person's asleep at the bar across from you. It's what's relevant to me. How do I do my job better? What's going to, even from a fundamental standpoint as a bartender, how do I make more money? Well, gosh, I'm going to engage this person and keep them here longer too, right? So I think we fight that a lot. It's just a different conversation of how do I show this in its best light through the lens of beer versus like, how do I make this exactly what wine service feels like?
That's spot on. I think the industry's kind of corrected itself already with a lot of that.
Yep.
A lot of the higher end geeky beer releases aren't as prevalent as they were years ago. So that's refreshing to hear that's the take of it. We've seen a lot of higher education college programs of different every aspect of beer. Where does the Cicerone Certification Program kind of fit within that or differentiate itself than like a brick and mortar school, or some of them are online?
And there's some here in San Diego, a lot of actually good programs here in San Diego. And I think we're in conversations as to try to be a bit of a supplement to some of those programs, and a lot of them address the business of craft beer and they cover kind of a well-rounded approach. And I think we come in and try to kind of have something you can then go and kind of test on or certify with and walk away with, a credential that is a supplement to that sometimes, is more well-known or means more in the immediate time than a diploma or certificate from one of those programs. And that's not to downplay any of those. They're, especially in San Diego, have some really good ones. But I think Cicerone creates kind of a known level of knowledge base that you've then kind of crossed a barrier of kind of knowing, and that you can showcase that credential. And I think there's some things we cover that I don't think are necessarily covered, specifically tasting and sensory on a high level that maybe not all those programs cover. So
and it's, although you do offer some of the support curriculum for that, I'm somebody who's very self-taught. And it's nice being able to take your knowledge or learn on your own and then go for that certification, as opposed to sitting through 12 to 24 months of curriculum that somebody else developed that might not resonate with your role or what you want to do or what you're interested in.
Yeah, and I think so. As we think about new things, we're looking at. I mean, that the live class offering for Cicerone has been a bit stagnant over the years, and the gap between 160,000 certified beer servers and 4,700 plus certified Cicerones it's a big gap. So how do we get more people interested from level 1 to level 2? Well, one, you grow the value of that certification, and we're trying to. We have some things we want to do that. But I think you offer some of those things where I'm not sure if I want to take a certified test, but I would take a class on Belgian beer to see where I'm at or learn a little bit more. And then how do we kind of create some of that chain along the way? And I think Ray in the early days was very wary of like a money grab situation of like, you don't have to go through us. You can learn on your own. You can buy all these different books from these different folks and get their perspective, not just Ray Daniels' perspective or Cicerone's perspective. And I think the industry's evolved though, where a lot more people today with online learning and the generation that's come up, they want to be led to water a little bit more. And so I think we need to fill that need, and there's no reason we couldn't be the voice of that. And, I've got friends that may never take a certified Cicerone, but like I said, they would do a beer tasting sensory class. They would do a Belgian beer class because they want to learn more. And then they take 4 or 5 of them, and all of a sudden they're like, maybe I will take that test,
right.
So anyway.
Yeah.
That's why.
How, with the different levels, I mean, what would you say that the, each kind of level is applicable to each different kind of role, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're more on the marketing distribution side, is there like, some recommendations on like what level's right for each individual kind of person?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to vary somewhat to where you're coming from, what your background is, what you know and don't know already. Some of that. I think beer server, I mean, it's in the name. It's really kind of tailored as an entry level foundation for anyone, but also a lot of things on beer service. The certified level kind of amplifies that just one more, and that's kind of the bread and butter certified sommelier kind of. You are a certified Cicerone at level 2, but there's a huge range of folks doing different things in there. We had I want to say something like 30 plus certified Cicerones in our marketing department at Molson Coors, right? And when you're taking the Blue Moon team through Belgian beer history, they may never quite bring those to life for the macro audience like some, but
right.
At least they're grounded in things that are relevant to the kind of the brand itself, right? So that would be one. As you go up, the higher levels tend to be really personality driven. The advanced, some people see as like a way to separate from the certified folks. I've kind of gone a little bit further in my journey. It was originally created as a bit of a buffer between the master exam and the certified exam, which that jump is just intense. And I think they were seeing a lot of folks not doing great on the master exam and going, we need to give these folks a bit of a primer or an in-between on how to bridge the gap. And so I think that advanced thing is we've everybody from, I mean, you're in beer if you're doing that, most likely, right? So you see everybody from people running craft sales at a distributor, beverage director for a restaurant chain, any number of things like that. A lot of them do have aspirations of taking the master exam eventually, though, I'd say.
Why did you do it?
Which, the master exam?
Yeah.
Because I'm crazy and have an obsessive side. Once you go down that rabbit hole and realize what you don't know about beer and how much there is out there and get all these perspectives, I fell in love with just the learning part of it. And I think if you talk to the folks that have passed that exam, that's one of the common threads is it's an exercise in pleasure and pain. It's fun to go down the rabbit hole. It wasn't always enjoyable. But there's got to be some sort of kind of obsessive love for learning more, right? And the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so, it was more when I started, 7 people had passed and it was like, am I even in the conversation? And then once you kind of go down the road, you go, maybe I am in the conversation. And then, took it once, didn't pass, but was close enough to be like, I'm going to try to do it again. And then had some folks I studied with at Molson Coors and all ended up passing, which was a fun cohort, and that was a difference maker.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, on this podcast a lot, we like looking forward and looking at the next couple years.
Sure.
Coming in, into the role that you have and in position of guiding that organization, you must have some foresight over the next 3, 5, 10 years. Where do you see the organization going and how can it benefit San Diegans? Yeah,
good question. I think we are locked in on keeping it as relevant as possible. I think I've alluded to that. So I think the organization is going to continue to grow in the U.S. We have a ton of international business, but the bread and butter is in the U.S. and this industry is going through, some headwinds. I think you've alluded to on past shows. And I think education now it could be tempting to make it the first thing to go, but I think even more now than ever, to differentiate and elevate an experience is tantamount, right? So I think we're focused on some of that industry application, giving people some tools, whether it's free content and online panels and seminars and things like that, to potentially paid classes and stuff like that, of ways to continue to do that. Have an IPA class, right? That would be especially relevant to San Diego, right? Where it's laying the foundation of like, you know, here is something that came out in the early 2000s. Here's what the trend is today and some things in between. Let's talk through it and then come at it from a ton of angles of how would I pair IPA? How would I sell it? And I think stuff like that, because of that prevalence of that style in the industry, is applicable to not only San Diegans, but anyone. So I think we know we want to continue to go with some of the trends in the industry. We've done some syllabus updates this year that have already encapsulated new hop trends, NA beer, gluten-free beer. And again, no one's going to have a master's degree in NA beer production, but it needs to be a topic on our syllabus, right? So I think we're going to continue to do that. And from an industry perspective, I think we're going to go after some of the consumer side, and so that your consumer at the bar knows what a Cicerone is, better for you and better for the beer industry. What glasses do I need at home? How do I go into that beer aisle and look at this sea of IPAs that have dragons and crazy artwork? And how do I make sense of all that? Because I do think that is one of the reasons the category has some struggles, is people don't enjoy shopping for beer that don't know much about beer. And so how do we make that a little less painless and more exciting?
We can start by, is it made in San Diego?
That's
a good draw.
Right. And that's going to be fresh.
And I say it's cheeky, but there's truth to that, you know?
Yeah. Well, and this, to go to your San Diego question specifically, I mean, dense market, the audience for beer is already there. It's a two-sided coin. They're here, but a lot of people are trying to get their attention, right? So to me, it's giving people tools to kind of continue to stand out in that world, I guess I would say. And then just from an overall standpoint, I think bringing some more personality to Cicerone. I think that academic feel was intentional in the early days. But if you look at like the social media, like we've done a pretty significant flip on how we're coming to life, because it's like, let's have some fun, visually kind of interesting to look at things, but also once in a while, let's talk about some people that enjoy drinking beer, because that's why we're all doing this, right? So it's cool to get people to pass a test, but it's also fun to drink beer and taste it, and the social aspect of that. And I think that's been absent a little bit. So I don't know if that answers your question. For San Diego, I think it's a market right now that is facing a ton of competition, and I think needs as many tools as you can explore. And you've had guests talking about that.
Yeah, well, we're happy to work with you. And, you know, as much as, you know, if you want to be a test market for certain ideas, I think we're a good, mature market with a lot of really quality breweries that are, you know, nearby. So that's a great connection to make.
Yeah, and White Labs has been a good partner from a classroom perspective, and we like our attendance at exams and classes in San Diego is always pretty high. And so I think, you know, I've been in it's been 6 months of like keeping the lights on here, but there's, I think for us to not be a fixture in the San Diego community would be a mistake. And I think, and Jason's kind of doing the same thing in Chicago, right? So I think you'll see more to come there. And yeah, it would be love to partner with your education series, whatever it is. There's a number of ways we could do it, right? And it's just picking the one that's going to be the most impactful for the local folks. Yeah.
Cool. Well, tell the listeners where they can find more about you if they want to follow up or keep
learn more about the program.
So worldwideweb.cicerone.org is the website, and you can go on there. There's everything from free downloadable syllabi, study resources, book lists. There's a lot of guidance on that website. It's a little dense of a website, but there's a lot on there that can kind of help you get started, and then you can see all our products from there.
That's beautiful. Where can they find you at social media?
Cicerone. That's
easy.
Easy enough. So on Instagram, so that's the main one. But
cool. It's great. We appreciate your time and having you.
Right on.
Absolutely. And if you want to see more episodes like this one, make sure to follow us on YouTube and all of our different podcasting platforms. And you can follow us at social media at SD Brewers on Instagram and Facebook. And we hope to see you at the next one.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me.